a little bit of the bio.
Sure.
You got to fill me in. How do you get to becoming the Chief Marketing Officer at HRC?
Well, you know, I have always worked on progressive issues, and when an opportunity came up at the Human Rights Campaign, I jumped at it. And one of the best advice I had ever heard about a job or a job offer is essentially, something comes up, you're like, I will walk through a wall for that job. I will walk through a wall for that job. And that's how I felt about HRC. I really believed that it was the civil rights issue of our time. Now, I joined in 2005. And if I can take you back a little bit in history, you might remember that in 2004, there was a very intense and difficult election, and where the LGBT community was largely and unfairly blamed for the loss of the presidential election. There were 19 ballot initiatives in the states around marriage equality. So I joined HRC in 2005. One of the first campaigns that I worked on was in a Republican-controlled Congress essentially wanted to add an amendment to our Constitution banning same-sex marriage. So that was the time, right? 2005. Fast forward 11 years, and I was on the steps of the Supreme Court when they announced that marriage equality was the law of the land. It was an absolute whirlwind of a ride, and something that I'm so proud and grateful to have been a part of it. We really saw history change over the course of that time, but more importantly, public opinion and culture, and that's the piece that I worked on.
So how do you work with those that are in the opposition, in a way, that are working against, because I think a lot of us as causes, or whether we're at companies, we got our blinders on, that we're focused on our thing and getting our message, but not listening to what's also out there. Because this was a heavy contested situation, obviously.
Well, I think, you know, there were a lot of different strategies that we had, and one of the most powerful vehicles for change were actually people in the community themselves. And part of what we did was helping people to come out. And not just come out to your family and friends, you come out to your dry cleaner, your doctor, your neighbor, your coworker, so that people would know someone who was LGBT. And it wasn't just a stereotype or someone on television, but they actually knew someone and likely liked them and cared about them.
Right.
And so that was a really, really big emphasis for the work that we did around culture. But we also used influencers. We also drove a political agenda. I mean, we really attacked this from every angle, working with corporations, and this was a big piece of it. After the loss of the election, the organization really took a hard look and said, you know, where can we do things differently? And where can we really maximize change? And that was really corporate America. And so for years, corporate America led the way where law and government didn't. And I see that in so many social issues, actually, the public and corporations sort of taking the mantle on a lot of things. But in terms of opposition, you know, I would say that we really sought to understand, and we really sought to confront it, and confront it aggressively. And, you know, at a certain point, you know, haters are going to hate, right? And so you have to sort of let go with that. But we tried to be quick, we tried to be nimble, and aggressive in a lot of our messaging.
Now, behind us, you're seeing a change in a logo that also happened. Talk about what was the conversation behind the scenes?
So the first thing is, if anyone ever says to you, if your boss ever says to you, I just want this to go viral, like...
How many of you have had that problem?
That's like the worst. I hate that.
The next Ice Bucket Challenge.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God. So our intent was never to go viral, right? Like this was part of a bigger plan that we had. And I tell this story about when we knew we were at a tipping point, right? On the eve when President Barack Obama was reelected, we were actually in 4 states working on ballot initiatives around marriage equality. And I'll tell you truthfully that as we sat there with a lot of key leaders, there was only one person that thought we were going to be victorious in all 4. I mean, the community had been burned at the ballot box, you know, just a very short several years prior. And so no one really thought that we were on the precipice, even though we knew we had wins, all along the way. No one thought that this was the tipping point. But reflecting back now, we really see that. But this was part of a plan, and so we created a war room. We had a very aggressive communication strategy, and I had this idea one day, literally walking in the stairwell of our office, and thought, what if we took our iconic blue and yellow logo and tinted it red, which for us was the color of love and what these cases really symbolized. And I think the key to the success of this is that two things. So first, I only checked in with my boss. I didn't ask anybody else. If we had to do this by committee, and this is also like a branding, you don't do this, you don't change your logo. But I felt so strongly and passionately that this was if there was ever a moment, this was it.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court had never heard marriage cases before, so this was it. And then, the second piece of it is I didn't brand it. I didn't say visit hrc.org for more information. It was not that. This was about giving people a way to show their support. And what happened was that millions of people around the world showed their support. And the intent, again, was never to go viral. Our intent was always, how do we change hearts and minds on this issue? And if I can just tell you a quick story about this. I get asked a lot, is this armchair activism and, just people changing things on social. I fundamentally believe that that's where conversations are happening. They're happening in person, but they're also happening on social, and that is a really powerful medium for change. And I think we're seeing that with a whole new generation. But we heard a story of the many thousands of people that wrote in to tell us what this logo meant to them. And the story was about from a young man in Arkansas who was a gay soldier. And you can imagine how hard it is to be in the military and be gay in Arkansas. He had recently come out to his mother, who was a born-again Christian, and the conversation hadn't gone well at all. And he wrote us to say that his mom, on the first day of this campaign, changed her profile picture to the red logo. And she said something to the effect of, I may not agree with him, but I love you so much, and I love you for who you are. And he said that for the first time, he felt loved and accepted for who he truly was. And so that really was the power of this campaign. Yes, we went viral. Yes, got a lot of media attention, but it really was fundamentally about changing hearts and minds, and that's the work that I do every day.
What was probably one of those that you look back on HRC besides this? Is there anything else that you would say you really remember as a key learning lesson for you?
I would say looking back, I feel very fortunate to have worked in a culture that allowed me to take risks. I mean, Jean said it earlier, It's about being fearless, right? And the issues that we worked on were about people. And fundamentally, all issues are about people, right? Not about polar bears. If you really want to
get to that in a second.
If we want to change people's hearts and minds, it's about people.
Yeah.
And so we really were always looking for, how can we exceed our bar? How can we jump higher? How can we do better? How can we lean in more? And I think, I don't know that there was one moment overall, but it was about how do we encourage our staff to take risk, to make change. And, working in that kind of culture, always pushed me, and that's something I try to do with my staff now at Conservation International.
Well, that's a good segment, because I want to show a video before we talk about Conservation International. So let's go ahead and watch this video.
Today's greatest threat is not climate change, not pollution, not famine, flood, or fire. It's that we've got people in charge of important shit who don't believe in science. So what are we at Conservation International going to do? We're working to change the conversation around nature. We're focusing on jobs and livelihoods and security. It's not about animals and trees and icebergs. It's about the ability of a community to survive. It's about your child, what you're putting in your body, your future. We'll help equip communities and businesses to lead. Show them it's in their own self-interest to protect nature. We'll give people the tools they need to change their world. There is a new generation of leaders. I have a thought for them. Go for it. All in. Stick with it. If we don't stop the destruction of nature, nothing else will matter. Simple as that.
Wow.
Anybody recognize that voice?
Harrison.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I suspect that would not be approved in a lot of organizations, at least at the beginning. I mean, because this conversation around climate change in America is a very interesting one. And I know that you are all sort of tackling this narrative. So what is your approach now to where we are today with this conversation?
Well, look, climate change is the greatest threat we face. I fundamentally believe that, nothing else matters. I mean, the world is literally on fire. Literally on fire, right? And that's why I came to Conservation International, was to work on this issue. I think there's a lot of different narratives. Certainly we find ourselves at a challenging moment in this country when the president pulled out of the Paris Agreement. But I also think that we see a lot of hope. And I think that has to be a key part of the messaging around climate change. People have to believe that there is still hope, right?
Right.
And we're seeing that. And, from the perspective of working internationally, from working with corporations and businesses stepping up to lead, where government is not, I think I see a lot of hope and opportunity. But, to the effect, to the point of this video is that you got to make people feel something, right? If you're producing something, this is a great litmus test for you. If you're producing something, you're kind of like, but you just want to get it done. Odds are that's how people are going to feel about it, right? You have to feel inspired. You have to look at the things that you're producing, the content that you're producing, and you have to be fearless. You have to be bold, because that's what it takes to cut through the communication clutter in this day and age. You've got to sort of, set the bar and exceed that bar. And that's what we're trying to do, is changing the conversation, getting people to focus on the fact that before their town is on fire, that there are opportunities and ways that you can help protect and stop and slow climate change. And so we're being really aggressive because we have to. The time is now to be doing the time was actually 30 years ago, truth be told, right? But the time is now. We have no time to wait. And so I just feel in the same way that I felt at the Human Rights Campaign, we don't have the luxury of waiting. There are people's lives are on the line. When I was working on marriage equality, it was like people were coming to me. I mean, I would see people in the office, at events, around the country, and they're like, I just want to be loved and accepted for who I am. I want my marriage to the person I've been with for 50 years to be recognized. That fueled me and gave me, the energy to keep doing the work. And I feel very much the same about climate change.
Now, I had a chance to look at a couple other videos from Conservation International, and they talk about it from the perspective of water. The message is from nature itself, done by celebrities, of course. But talk about that positioning that you're trying to do with those.
Well, I think, it's an amazing brand campaign, and I think working with influencers is a really important and valuable part of any conversation. They have the ability to capture people's imaginations and attention, more so than we would. And so it's a powerful series called Nature is Speaking that uses the voiceovers of celebrities to voice what, water, forest, the ocean, the redwoods, so many different campaigns just to capture people's attention and sort of, to literally give a voice to nature. And I think a very powerful and amazing campaign. It was actually developed in partnership with Lee Clow, who was the mastermind behind Apple's Creative. So, just an amazing, powerful campaign that, utilizes influencers and helps to elevate, we hope, to that dialogue around nature.
Yep. All right, let's get to some questions. So make sure that everybody puts in their questions at Slido, S-L-I-D-O. And then the first one is around, you mentioned LGBTQ, LGBT cause was the civil rights issue of our time in 2018. What is that civil rights issue today?
I think we're seeing it. I think if anyone saw the Nike commercial yesterday with Colin Kaepernick, I think we're seeing brands step up and lean up in social issues like never before. I would say, this country, I think that what I would say is, just because marriage happened and became the law of the land didn't mean that people's minds changed overnight, right? We saw a great curve of public opinion and public acceptance. I think that's still happening on so many issues. Gun violence, women's issues, racism. There are a lot of things happening in our world and in our country right now.
So here's an interesting one from the funding standpoint, because I suspect you interact with funders and donors and others. And this was around, yes, to a culture where staff takes risks. They were giving a little nod. Yeah. And then in addition to that, how do you bring on funders or partners who agree in this era that is rightfully evaluation driven?
I have found that you have to inspire them, right? The reports, right? The reports, the evaluations, honestly, no one reads those. I mean, really, the extent of it. I mean, but it's about how do you make it digestible? How do you inspire them? How are you looking for constant points of communication and touch points? How are you talking about your work? I think this is a really key piece. You have to be a great internal marketer for your work. If there's something that you feel passionately about, if there's a campaign, an agenda that you feel passionately about, you have to be both your own best advocate, right? You have to be your best marketer, and you have to execute. It's not enough to have a great idea. You have to be willing to do the work, to lean in and execute. And I've found that communicating with donors, funders, looking to inspire them and looking for touch points on how you can give them progress and updates, in a personal way, and making it digestible has worked for me.
So there's a success question on here, and it asked about how do you know if people join and some of the metrics and so on. But how do you know in general you're successful?
Well, I think everyone looks at the metrics, right? Like, are you, for an institution or an organization, are you getting email signups, donations, clicks, likes, shares, etc. I think public opinion polling is the best way to know if you're actually moving the needle. And we did that extensively when we were monitoring marriage equality to sort of see where we are. So
going out and listening to the population.
Absolutely, absolutely. It can be done formally or informally, but I think that's really key, is to take a temperature, and so that you have some sort of measure of success.
Yeah. Now, you've talked about companies as well. So how are companies working with you on this? Because we're going to talk about plastics in a minute as well, and we have a company coming out here talking about what they're doing in sustainability. But from your perspective, how are you all working with companies? And then a follow-up will be how you deal with those that still practice bad stuff.
I think that, we work to engage them on their practices. We work to help guide them, to lead them, to evaluate. Plastics is great, and I'm really excited about this next group. I think we're at a tipping point, right? I think it was the images that we saw of you both need something iconic in the imagery, whether it's a personal story of someone or something really shocking. Can help move the needle, but you also have to give people something to do. What am I going to do about this giant island of plastic trash? What's one thing? And I think that's why the straw movement was so powerful, right? It's an entry point to getting people to help change behaviors. But I think what we're seeing is that companies are really interested in leaning in. The big message after the president pulled out of the Paris Agreement was that we're still in. Right? They are committed to meeting their targets, and many, if not all, have. I think there are many different ways to work with companies too that, to help them move the needle. And what we saw at the Human Rights Campaign was that you can't expect that a major company with thousands of employees around the world is going to be able to turn something like that. That just, the Dick's Sporting Goods is a rare occurrence, right? And the most effective way is to start a conversation internally. And so at the Human Rights Campaign, we worked really closely with their employee resource groups to help start a dialogue internally, to help them guide and form their policies and practices. And then once they had that conversation internally, they were now ready ready to take the next step of signing on to the Supreme Court brief, or, you know, funding a ballot initiative in Washington State. I mean, there are so many examples. They were ready to take it to the next level, to speak out publicly. And I think that, you know, sometimes you need a stick, but sometimes you need, you know, you need to have those conversations to help move the needle.
Start from the inside and work up.
Absolutely.
All right, so we have just a few seconds.
Yep.
What's sort of your last learning lesson, one thing you want everybody to remember?
Listen, like, the issues that you work on are so important, and I can imagine that you're all passionate about social change. And this would be my advice, is that you have to lean into those issues. Again, you have to be bold, you have to be inspiring, and if it's something that you care passionately about, no matter where you are on the organizational chart, don't be afraid to speak up, because we need you to be doing that. We need people speaking up every single day. You'll hear from many of them this afternoon. But I spoke with Fred, whose daughter was murdered at Parkland, and I just said, thank you for continuing to speak up about this issue, because that's what we need to change hearts and minds and to move the needle. And I would encourage and ask that of all of you here today.
Great. Anastasia, thank you.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.